And welcome back once again to our lessons on the colonization of the Americas by Europeans. Today we're looking at quite a number of groups, basically the same groups of people that we looked at yesterday, colonizing the Americas, specifically the English, the French, Portuguese, and Dutch. Yesterday we talked about how they got over here. Today we're going to look at life on the ground. And just like yesterday, this lesson is going to be pretty compact. It's going to be pretty short, especially compared to Monday. And by Monday, I meant Tuesday, but whatever. Learning objectives, you'll notice, pretty much haven't changed. Still looking at the processes and comparing them to other colonies, as well as seeing if there's anything unique about them. There is some unique stuff today. That's going to be my principal focus. What made these colonies different? How was life in the Americas for people in the French colonies different than life for people in the Spanish colonies? So we are going to go kind of quickly through this. Uh, Buckle up, let's go. Assume for the record that this is another one of those highly concentrated lessons. Since it's pretty short, assume that if I say it, you probably need to know it. So we're going to hammer this out pretty quickly. The English colonies, the English hold a few Caribbean islands, the east coast of what is now the modern United States, including our own home state of North Carolina. Hudson's Bay, if you look up in the top of the map there, that area of Canada, that surrounding area. The economic basis of the English colonies is by far the most wide-ranging that we're going to look at today. You've got sugar, mostly in the Caribbean. You have cash crops, specifically indigo, rice, tobacco, and later, and never really that much during the colonial period, of course, King Cotton. Shipbuilding as well as trade up in the northern United States, and the area around Hudson's Bay provided a whole lot of fur. We're going to do a whole lesson on the fur trade next week. British relations, English relations, and those terms technically can't be used interchangeably for reasons that I will get to later in this class. But the relationship between the colonists in this area and the natives in this area are not good. They're not Spain level bad, but they're still pretty bad. There's a lot of violence, distrust. Quite frankly, this is rehashing American history here, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. And the British colonies were founded, the English colonies were founded by companies that were seeking to make a profit in the Americas. So when they arrived, whether it was the Virginia Company in Virginia seeking to make money there, or the Hudson's Bay Company up in Canada seeking to make money there, everybody was looking to make a profit. The problem was they were hoping to make a profit like the Spanish, who had found gold, and they weren't able to. So the English had to modify the way their colonial economy worked. And by the start of the 1700s, they were doing pretty well. They had actually created viable economies all throughout the New World. The English colonies are doing really well, partially because of their economic diversity, but that economic diversity was forced upon them when they didn't find gold and Native Americans to exploit like the Spanish had. A huge social difference between the English colonies and the Spanish is the sheer number of European settlers who arrive in the English colonies, and that's really, really big. By 1750, on the eve of the American Revolution, the English have about 5 times more European settlers in their colonies than the Spanish do in theirs, and if you look at them on a map, the English colonies are much smaller comparatively than the Spaniards. And that large number of settlers, especially once you factor in the second and third and fourth onward waves of colonists had a lot of women in them, meant that there was a lot less racial mingling in the colonies, in the English colonies, British colonies, compared to the huge amounts of racial mingling that you see in Spanish America. And the results of that are interesting. They're not unambiguously good or unambiguously bad. Hopefully, by this point in history, you realize we don't really do that in this class. The United States subsequently and Canada subsequently are much more European than their Spanish counterparts. There's not nearly as much native or even African culture mixing coming into play in the U.S. and other areas. And there are substantially fewer slaves. Given the Amerocentric history that you guys have been taught, that may come as a surprise to you. But there are much fewer slaves in the English colonies, British colonies, than in Spanish America or Portuguese America. And that is largely due to the fact that the cash crops of the southern United States weren't as profitable as sugar, and Britain didn't have as much sugar growing territory as the Portuguese or Spanish. Now keep in mind, even one person in slavery is too many people. And the results of this are, again, a mixed bag. There are fewer slaves in the English colonies, which is a good thing, but that also creates a much more rigid racial structure than the one that we see in Latin America with the mestizos and other mixed-race individuals moving up and down the social ladder. That didn't really happen in the United States. Those of you who remember American history might recall some of the 1% laws stating that people who had even a bit of non-white ancestry were to be considered colored. So yeah, again, kind of a mixed bag there with the English colonies. Let's move to another mixed bag. It starts really positive though in France. So the French colonies, they own a few Caribbean islands, the most notable one being Haiti. They also own both the Mississippi River Valley and the St. Lawrence River Valley. The economic basis is, hey, look, sugar again, as well as fur. And the relations with the natives, big twist, surprise, are actually pretty good. The French colonized the New World in remarkably small numbers, especially compared to the Spanish and English, and even the Portuguese and Dutch. And the result of that was, especially in the northern, what's now the northern United States slash Canada, they had to have good relations with the natives because the natives were their principal fur trappers. We'll talk about that in our lesson on the fur trade. And because up in western New York, they were bumping up against the Iroquois Confederacy, who were very strong militarily and politically, and the French realized it's better to be nice to these people than to try to fight them. So that's the positive. What's the negative? The negative is Haiti. Haiti receives a jaw-dropping amount of slaves during the colonial period, and most of them will die there within a couple of years of their arrival. Haiti is a nightmare of a place to be, and we will look at that both in the sugar trade and in the Haitian Revolution lesson. So we'll be visiting Haiti twice more in this class. They're not super happy lessons, as a fair warning. Moving on. All right, so Portuguese America. Portuguese colonies pretty much consists of Brazil, think back to yesterday and the Treaty of Tordesillas. Their economic basis, what a surprise, it's sugar. Their relation with the natives isn't talked about enough, but their relationship with the natives is actually pretty bad. They forced natives further into the Amazonian jungles. If you want to look to those of you who are a bit aware of current events, who are aware that the tribes of the Amazon are still being repressed and forced off their land, that's been going on for 500 years, guys. It's not a new development, and it starts with the Portuguese wanting to push these people off their land so they can grow some sugar. Portuguese colonial efforts were, as we will discuss, or as we have discussed, excuse me, in class, mostly targeted at building new trade posts in Africa and Asia, but they do turn a tidy profit from the sale of sugar in Brazil, as well as being Europe's major slave traders for most of the colonial period, lest you think that they were okay guys. Indeed, Brazil, which is large, but still, Brazil, Portuguese America, is the #1 importer of enslaved Africans during the period where the slave trade was legal. So, yeah, cheerful. All right, our last set, told you this was a shorter lesson comparatively, is the Dutch. And the Dutch own a variety of locations. We talked about the Dutch gaining their independence a little bit yesterday. And their locations are the Caribbean, They owned Brazil for about 25 years, and they actually owned what is now New York for 60 years. I am using the term New York. They called it the New Netherlands, and its capital, which is now New York City, was called New Amsterdam. Make your life simple. Use the modern terms. Um, their economic basis is sugar again in the Caribbean and Brazil, as well as trade in New York. Their relationship with the natives is bad, more on the level of the English than others. You know the drill, fighting with the natives, swindling them in trade deals and treaties. The story of Manhattan Island is actually a bit overblown for any of you who know it. Any of you who don't worry too much about it. But the Dutch didn't have a good relationship with the Native Americans either, and they wanted to gain wealth by both colonizing unclaimed lands, like some small islands, we'll see that in a second, as well as gaining other colonial territories if they saw like military weakness in the Portuguese. That's how they were able to take over northern Brazil. It, Again, it didn't last, it didn't stick, but it is kind of fascinating to me at least that a good sized chunk of Brazil was at one point in time owned by the Dutch. All right, now we bring up the Dutch mostly because Dutch colonization in the Americas was largely a failure. If you look at the map over here, you're looking at the islands that held a permanent Dutch presence, and you could wad all of them together, and they're not going to be the size of, even some of those smaller islands out there, certainly not the size of Cuba or Haiti or Puerto Rico. Um, the Portuguese retake Brazil from them. New York is given to the English, actually, in exchange for an island full of nutmeg. And the only permanent Dutch holdings in the Americas are going to be a South American nation named Suriname, which is a demographic hodgepodge. It's actually a really cool country, but it's kind of obscure, and a few small Caribbean islands. However, the Dutch do retain a presence in America as traders. They are going to continue shipping stuff to Europe, to America, to Africa and Asia, including slaves. For centuries. And like Portugal, we're going to talk about the Dutch again when we talk about Europeans in Asia. All right, guys, 3 down, 1 more to go. Tomorrow we actually start another one of those mini units. We did the Gunpowder Empires mini unit. Well, tomorrow we're going to start the trade micro unit or mini unit, and we're going to do that by looking at some sweet, sweet misery. Get ready to look at the sugar trade. See you tomorrow, but digitally. See you Monday in real life.